Live.
There
Here we go. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this live on digital accessibility as part of our Give the Gift of Access campaign this Christmas. I'm joined by Simon O'Gorman from Adapt IT, Kay Moores from The Drum, and then David Agar, who's a fintech entrepreneur. I'm so grateful to have you all here today. Before we get started, just a reminder to anyone watching that you can subscribe to our newsletter at disabilityexpo.com, and that's where you can find information about the 10 priority action areas of the event that will be happening at Excel London next year. So I guess the first question is, can I ask you all to introduce yourself? Can we start with Simon?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name's Simon O'Gorman. As mentioned, I work for Adapt IT. I'm an incredibly large geek, nerd, whatever you want to call me. I love everything technology and accessibility, and I help people access IT and gaming solutions.
Kay?
Hi, I'm Kay. Pronouns are she and her. For those who can't see me, I'm a blonde white female. I'm wearing a blue and white knitted jumper, and I've got turquoise and grey over ear headphones. I'm disabled myself and I've had a brain injury, but I actually work in digital media, have done for the last 21 years, and I co-founded a digital agency in 2006 to create sustainable and accessible digital experiences. So we do everything from web apps, exhibition experiences, animation, video, and traditional marketing.
Thank you. And David?
Hi, I'm David Agar. I'm the founder of Bankability. And Bankability is all about enabling people who find existing digital banking. We are currently and then to beta launch, and hopefully that will be in the early part of Q2 next year. So for us, the mantra is, accessible banking for everyone. And when you make something,
I think we've got some sound issues, David. So I don't know if you're right, if I mute you just for a second, and then I'll unmute you. So the first question that we'll start with is, what motivated you to become involved in the field of digital accessibility? Kay, do you want to come in on this one first?
Yeah, of course. So, like I said, although we founded in 2006, so we're creating digital experiences, we were doing what we wrongly assumed was accessible, such as, we were adding things like alt text and looking at color contrast and color blindness, etc. But then I had a couple of strokes, and after my subsequent brain surgery, I suddenly experienced so many barriers online as I tried my rehabilitation, and I kind of saw the mistakes that an industry that I loved was causing. It was causing so much pain. So I decided instantly that we needed to change as a agency, retrain and specialize in accessibility.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And Simon?
I got into this because of a family member. My wife's dad had Parkinson's disease. Unfortunately, it started to get a lot worse during the COVID period. And the only way he could communicate and we could help him was to give him communication tools that he could use at home. Unfortunately, standard IT and things like that weren't suitable for his particular condition and the disabilities that he'd gained. And we had nowhere to go. We had no idea who to speak to, what would work, what wouldn't work. There was a lot of technology available. But, it was very much kind of, we'll try this, try that, try something else. And you just end up with a cupboard full of basically really expensive equipment that you couldn't use. We got through talking to a gentleman called Martin Sliper that had been working in this area for 20 years. And he helped us a lot. And because of my background in cybersecurity and IT, we really wanted to get involved, and we ended up buying Martin's company, and the rest, they say, is history. And we've been going for 2.5 years now, and we provide complete through life solutions for whoever needs support, hopefully to try and make the best of the purple pound.
Thank you, Simon. And David, hopefully now that we've sorted out the sound issues, but yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can everybody hear me now? Okay, all right. So yes, what my inspiration, my son was diagnosed dyslexic when he was 6, and then when he was 16, he was diagnosed as autistic. And I have been in the fintech space for the last to look into the challenges that my son faces, because he cannot use digital banking. People here who are effectively excluded from digital banking, and traditionally they would rely on going to branch to do their banking face to face. But of course, as you all know, the banks are trying to close down as many branches as possible, as quickly as possible, because they see it as a cost rather than an opportunity. So essentially, the vulnerable people who are affected here are being squeezed from all sides, and in extremis, this means that they could be financially excluded. So that's why I'm passionate about making bankability accessible banking for everyone.
Thank you, David. I think there's a bit of a delay in the sound, but what I'll do is if I stick with you, David, for the next question, and hopefully we can get ensure that we're working through these questions. So how would you define digital accessibility, David?
Digital accessibility for me, certainly in the context of banking, is that there are no barriers. So it's available to everybody on an equal level, and that nobody should be excluded. So digital accessibility means no barriers for me.
Thank you. One thing I noticed from all of your responses is that human lived experience, and sort of drawn you here. I don't know, Kay, what your thoughts are on how would you define digital accessibility in the work you do?
It's quite a big question, I'll be honest, and for me it's just about providing great user experience and providing super clear user journeys that for people that are functional and easy to use. It's kind of user-centered design, thinking that we are all different, whether we're elderly, whether we're have different native language, whether it's situationally you're looking at your phone in bright sunlight. It's just about making sure that, like David said, there's no barriers. It shouldn't be a privilege to be able to use digital.
And Simon?
Digital accessibility to me is exactly that. Everybody needs access to IT nowadays. You can't do anything without it. We talk about things that are critical within life, and whether that is to deal with mental health challenges or neurodiversity or physical disabilities. IT is needed to be able to not only manage all of those elements, but also work, play, etc. So it's about giving everybody access, however they need to use it.
Thank you. And I wonder why, this is going to sound a bit silly, but why is it so important in today's technology landscape? And could you share some examples or projects that are related to digital accessibility in your area? Kay, if I come to you first on that one.
I don't really think I've got anything specific, because for me it's we try and design accessible and code accessible by default. But why it's becoming more and more important is we are spending more and more time online. Like David mentioned earlier, so many things are going across to digital, and there's not that kind of you don't have that customer interaction that you are relying on your digital presence being as effective as being in store or talking to someone. So I just think that we live in two worlds. We live in the physical world, and we live in the digital world, and we actually spend more time in the digital world than we do in the physical world. Yeah. So that's really kind of all I've got to say, is that the digital world needs to be as accessible as it can be, the more and more time we spend in it.
Thank you. I think that builds upon something that was mentioned in a previous live where we talked about when you design for disabled people, you're actually designing for everyone, because it levels the playing field and it makes it accessible for.
Yeah, exactly. When you co-create with the disabled community, incredible things happen. We can innovate, and a lot of things that people rely on nowadays, like let's say text prediction or voice assistance or things like that, it all started from co-creating with the disabled community, and yeah, everyone benefits. So that's kind of why I'm saying I don't have a specific example, because by default that is what we do, and that's the kind of baseline that we need to work to. If it works for people with disabilities, it will work for everyone.
Thank you. Okay. David, do you have any examples from fintech?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question. Could you just repeat that?
Yeah, so it's why is it so crucial that we have digital accessibility in the technology landscape that we're developing around the world? And could you think of any examples or projects related to digital accessibility in your domain, so within fintech?
Yeah. Well, this of all, then it literally is not accessible, and that's just not equal for everybody. So, in terms of some examples, a lot of the existing digital banking, they're kind of designed for the mainstream. They're not designed for those on the edge, and those on the edge, happen to form part of the world's largest minority. But if you have, for example, if you are deaf or hearing impairment, then some banks have on-demand solutions, which as far as that goes, that's a good step forward. However, people with disabilities often have more than one disability, and so what happens if you have somebody who is deaf but is also autistic? How does that work? Or if they have ADHD, and this is where the bank's kind of one-dimensional approach to accessibility falls apart, really, in our view. So for us, it's all about the first thing that we want to do when we are in touch with a user is find out exactly what their accessibility needs are, understanding that everybody's needs are unique and different, and only then can we actually provide an optimized user experience for each user.
Thank you. And coming to you, Simon, obviously your field is gaming, but also you work in other areas of technology and stuff. What do you think is could you show any examples about the technology landscape?
So, I mean, David has got the hardest job, really, because he's got to be able to deal with pretty much every spectrum that's out there, whether that's physical challenges with regards to accessing the app, through to neurodiversity and how people think about going through the app, the different functions and things like that. We've got a very similar set of examples when we look at things like local authorities, drop-in centres, neighbourhood resource centres, in the sense that they have to be able to provide accessible solutions, whether that's software or hardware, so that their communities can access the vast amount of services that they have to offer or is available in the marketplace. So we work with 4 neighbourhood resource centres in the London area, and they provide not only recreational activities, so things such as gaming, things such as accessing social media and the web and things like that, but they also provide accessibility to the whole plethora of local authority services. And that gives them, or has given us, quite a lot of challenges, because we've needed to think about, right, if somebody has physical disabilities, such as they've only got the movement in one side of their body, for instance, what do we need to consider? Kay, for instance, what do they need to consider when using a mouse, using a keyboard, being able to use the different elements of a computer, simple things such as being able to go to an icon and double clicking, or being able to write a report. A lot of people are used to touch typing and things like that and using 2 hands. How do you enable that speed and accessibility when you've only got 1 hand to use, for instance? So things like one-handed keyboards, or keyboards that have in built-in mice, or different accessibility where you can type with 1 hand and use the movement of your head to be able to use the mouse, for instance. Then you've got gaming. A lot of games, Call of Duty, Fortnite and things like that, all require 2 mechanisms for being able to move, one for moving, one for moving about. How do you interpret that into maybe one-handed use? You can use your feet, you can use your knees, and there's different mechanisms like mounting, different switches and things that enable that accessibility. That also has to be interpreted into website use. How do you access websites? How do people with different neurodiversity think about how they access things? And it may not be straightforward. People that need to use screen readers, for instance, websites using screen readers actually is a bit of a minefield. In fact, probably 95% of websites you can't use because they're all designed to be really pretty, really nice, and unfortunately it's like comic books. They're really fantastic to look at if you've got really good eyesight and you're not neurodiverse. But because of that, there's a bubble top left, and then you're supposed to go to the top right or bottom left or bottom right. For neurodiverse people, that's mind-blowing. So, being able to present things so that screen readers can move them from the focal points and things, again, are considerations that generally aren't considered. And that's something that we have to look at with regards to how do we take that and then make it accessible, either through additional software or through accessible hardware and things like that. And for me, and that way of thinking about how do we help people engage, interact, and use those kind of systems is what accessible or digital accessibility is all about.
Thank you, Simon. I can tell the passion in all of your voices when you speak about your different fields. So, Kay, in your view, what's the most pressing accessibility challenge in your field? I know that's quite a broad question, but for you as a company, what is it that you've approached what have you done in approaching and addressing these issues, or that is the biggest issue?
I think Simon raised it very well just now. For me, it's the lack of accessibility for neurological conditions, like, you know, sensory processing. There's so much animation for animation's sake. It doesn't think about people with anxiety or epilepsy or vestibular disorders, neurofatigue, cognition. For me, that side of things are really, really missing. How we've addressed it is a couple of things, really. We've got a wide range of user testing in the community. So everything that we do, we use to test on lots and lots of people. And also we do education and talks to universities, because I honestly believe that, you know, you're not taught this at university. You leave with a degree in design, you go into the industry, and you're constantly making the mistakes and making things worse in the fact that you have to have the latest, coolest thing as far as kind of digital, but they're not actually taught at base level the principle and the kind of standard design that needs to come across. So for me, it's to shape the industry. You kind of have to start with the people that are going to be the future of our industry.
And for you, David, in your area of fintech, what do you think is the most pressing issue that we need to address?
I think it's well, there's more than one issue. That's the starting point. I think in fintech, well, in banking generally, there is a lack of understanding and motivation to support vulnerable customers in terms of digital accessibility. That's not the public noise that's coming out. Obviously, if you ask any bank, they'll point to X, Y, and Z things that they're doing. But largely, is, you know, in some cases, this is little more than a tick box exercise. There are certain regulations that they have to comply with, but at the risk of failing to comply with those, there's really very little downside, other than, oh, sorry about that, I will improve what I'm doing going forward. But in the meantime, you've got people who have disabilities who are, you know, getting frustrated, can lead to mental health issues, all things like that. These are real issues, and so, you know, that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we want the best way that we can. Now, there is no single silver bullet here. It is unlimited in terms of what people's individual needs are. So for bankability, you know, our development roadmap will never end. It will continue to try and better meet people's needs. Obviously, technology will improve over time as well. And to Simon's points, you know, 95% plus of websites out there do not work properly for people with accessibility challenges in some way, shape, or other. And if that has not been designed in from the beginning, then, you know, effectively it's giving a message out to those users to say that actually, you know what, we don't really care about you. And you could absolutely forgive anybody for thinking that. But for Kay's point, I think it's totally right that, you know, designers do not, on the whole, receive designing in accessibility and the importance of it. So you've kind of got this almost self-perpetuating culture where it's okay, we need a product, okay, let's design it. And then perhaps at the end, somebody says, oh, what about accessibility? Is it accessible how accessible is it for somebody? And really, it needs to be part of the initial thinking, and evolving from the design stage through to testing and then post-launch, to ensure that it's fulfilling the need.
Thank you, David.
Just to jump in, I know David and I spoke a couple of weeks ago about banking, and I've been having some issues with some fraudulent activity on my account, and I really struggled, and I spoke to David about it because, for example, when we interview someone for a job, we share the questions ahead so that they're prepared and etc. When it came to passing the kind of checks to try and get my money back, I was put on the spot. Bearing in mind, I've only got the one hand. I was holding a phone. They were asking me to log into the thing, tell me what the last 3 transactions were, asking all these questions, and I failed the test. That's how I saw it. And they said, I'm sorry, we need to end the call. And that it was kind of dismissed that I must be wrong, when actually they hadn't prepared me for what they were about to ask me, or even given me sort of a simple thing of giving me a heads up and saying, right, call back in 10 minutes with these answers. I would have got them. But it was the thing that I had to try and be online, plus look at, hold the phone, plus the kids were in the background. It was too much. And I think a lot of banking, it's relied on the fact that you've got no cognition impairments, and that you should know the answers to everything, because if you don't, you must be fraudulent yourself. Does that make sense? So yeah, thanks David for for the chat, and I definitely think it's something that from banking that really needs to be looked at.
Thank you, Kay. I can see a couple of comments in the chat of questions for us to come to. We will come to them in a second. Before we do so, just coming to you, Simon. What do you think are the most pressing issues in your area of work?
I hate to say it, but I think it's generally just human nature and culture. When it comes to any accessibility or things like that, it seems to be a second thought. Half the time it starts with somebody has a really good idea, and what does somebody do? They think about their particular circumstances, the way they do things, and the way that they would integrate something. The amount of organizations that we speak to that come in and go, you know what, we've got this great capability, but we've suddenly realized it's not accessible. What can we do? And at that point, we're kind of, this is going to be really difficult now. Because if it had been something that had been considered right at the beginning, and I'm not really one for regulation and things like that, but we do need absolutely a framework that puts accessibility at the forefront. I noticed Alan put a question in with regards to our company's tick boxing and things like that. I think they've kind of forced themselves into tick boxing because they're towards the end of their cycle for whatever they're doing. But they very much need to get into the point now where they think about accessibility and inclusion at the beginning of the life cycle and their decision making and their strategies and things like that, so that when we get 5-10 years down the line, I really hate to say, we're looking at that time frame, that it's built in rather than bolted on. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're actually up against at the moment.
Thank you. So the next question is, again, it's quite a broad question, but it's how does digital accessibility differ among your different areas? So I don't know if that's easy or hard to answer. And I'll probably come to you first, Kay.
I think it's quite a hard one, because it's the argument of kind of hardware versus software. So, there's no point in having a keyboard or mouse stick or screen reading JAWS or screen reading technology if actually the website or app or whatever it may be isn't coded correctly in the first place, or designed correctly. So I think the biggest difference is we do what you see on the screen, what Simon does, and lots of other fantastic people do the technology to make sure that that is still usable for how they want to work. So I mean, to be honest, there probably shouldn't be a difference, should there? Because it is just about the same outcome. It's still user-centered, design principles. But yeah, for me, it's the difference between hardware and software.
Thank you. And David, do you think there's a difference between what you do in fintech and the other areas of accessibility we've discussed?
I think the banking is down to the motivation. Where does the motivation come from to try and address accessibility? And perhaps, unlike other sectors, or maybe not, I don't know, but certainly with banking, I'm afraid the reality is that digital accessibility is not prioritized over bottom line. So banks are driven by making profits should be. However, banks also have a duty of care, and unfortunately, some of them have actually said to me, look, we appreciate that we have customers who have digital accessibility needs, but we cannot prioritize that at the moment because we have other strategically important focal points within the business. So that's kind of saying to me, well, yeah, we know that there are customers who have needs, permitting and resources permitting, we'll get round to it. But that's actually an unacceptable response from my point of view. The other thing about banking is that banks often look at their accounts, so they see they've got their very profitable accounts, they've got their kind of like okay accounts, and then they've got their loss-making accounts. Now, one bank actually said to me, well, maybe part of our strategy should be to encourage our loss-making accounts to go to our competitors. But maybe some or many of those loss-making accounts are loss-making because they're actually with customers who have digital accessibility needs, and that they find that the bank's products and services are not accessible, and so therefore they're actually excluded from taking out loans or taking on insurance policies or whatever, which could move them into the profitable profile of account. So I think that possibly is a difference between other sectors, but from a technical point of view, no, I don't think there is a massive difference.
I've actually heard as well, David, in the past, someone said to me, but we don't have any disabled customers, or we don't have customers with accessibility needs. And it's a case of, no, you don't, because they couldn't use it and they went elsewhere,
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a really important point, actually, because on the whole, banks do not know who their vulnerable customers are. They don't know which ones have disabilities. They don't know really very much about those customers, and because of the inaccessibility challenge, it's not easy for those customers to speak up and say, hey, look, I have a disability, I need additional support from you, because you're excluding me from what everybody else takes for granted. So there's a lot of ignorance which is within the culture. And there are some, to be fair, there are some individuals out there who are trying to make a difference. But you know, when you're one person, perhaps, and set culture,
Thank you, David. We've had a comment from Alan saying, being a software engineer,
WCAG, that's meant to be.
Yeah, doesn't go far enough, and IDE integrated development environments need to have accessibility tools by those with lived experience, and I think that's a theme that's come out throughout all of the conversations you guys have been having today with me and on the live. I think because like that whole lived experience is driving change, but we still got a long way to go. So just coming to you, Simon, quickly on that question, do you think that the area of work that your company operates in is different in terms of digital accessibility, or do you think it aligns with what David and Kay have both said?
I think it aligns with what David and Kay was saying. I don't actually think there's much difference between any of the areas that I work in. And I work across a very wide market space. They're all at varying different levels. I mean, it's probably not the right term to use, but every industry or every organization has their heroes that are trying to drive change and things like that. And if we move to the gaming industry, for instance, progression, which has been deemed really good, faster graphics, you know, lifelike imagery and things like that, has actually taken them away from a lot of things that they had that made games accessible. You know, the simpler interfaces, the really good gameplay that had simple graphics, which made it easier for people to see what's going on or what they need to do. Open world, for instance, has brought so many great advancements, but so many difficulties in the same thing. So, for instance, Chad, who's been on one of your things before, he's blind. I've noticed that you've got a few people in the audience today who are also blind. Open worlds are really difficult, because where do you go? How do you get to that next marker? And you need assistance to be able to do that. And that's just not built into the frameworks that Alan was talking about, that enables game makers, game developers to be able to build in those accessible elements. So they've almost got to redesign, rebuild the things that they had previously within these new worlds, and that's making it particularly difficult. But what we've also got to remember is IT is an accessible or an assistive technology. It's aimed at helping people to do things faster, more efficient, be able to access information in a way where they can digest it quicker. And you know, the developers and things need to remember that. I mean, the introduction of artificial intelligence, which I'm sure we'll come on to later, is the biggest advancement in accessibility really ever to hit the digital domain, because everything about it is about making things easier, accessible, etc. So, you know, I think over the next 5 years or so, things are going to advance greatly in the marketplaces and make my life easier to help people access what they need to access.
Thank you. I'm aware we've got 20 minutes left of the live, so I'm going to jump forward a couple of questions to kind of talk about the hope and the positives in all of this. So what successful initiatives or projects have you been involved in that have significantly impacted or improved digital accessibility in your expertise or area? Simon, do you want to come in first on that one?
Yeah, sure. And this is a negative positive, if that's possible. I'm seeing a lot of the fear of missing out. Mm-hmm. And that is driving a lot of organizations to really get their act together. Oh, I've seen that my competitor is doing this. What are we doing? Are we better than them? Can we show that we're accessible and we're really taking on board diversity and inclusion? And that really is helping a lot, because they're now open to that conversation. When we go in and say, look, there are ways to do things that enable IT and the digital domain to be more accessible for everybody, it is now a board level discussion, and we can have the discussions at the right level.
You've had a comment from Alan saying, we will benefit from gaming accessibility. This will extend into other sectors. Road car engineering development mainly come from F1.
Yeah. And just adding to that, and a lot of people may or may not like this, but where advancements are coming from are things like the defense industry, where gamification and things like that, how you maximize people's capabilities. So I've mentioned it before, cybersecurity industry, absolutely embracing neurodiversity, because in order to beat the bad guys, you have to think differently. You have to be able to take information and be able to look at it in different ways and different structures in order to be able to outthink very clever people. And, people with neurodiversities and disabilities are very clever, and they add that.
And for you, David, is there any successful initiatives or projects that you've been involved within FinTech already that you can share with us?
It's a bit difficult to talk about bankability because obviously we've not launched yet. But I can tell you that the previous startup I was involved with in the fintech space support diaspora communities who wanted to send money from Europe back home to Africa or Asia cost effectively. And when I joined them, the development team was already there. They hadn't got the license from the FCA, which I helped them to get. And then it was a case of full speed ahead to try and get the MVP launched, in beta launched. Now, during all that time, and with all those discussions and meetings and all the good stuff that you need to get the product ready, not one person mentioned the word accessibility. So, with what I know now, when we did launch, we had immediately excluded it because we hadn't included anything on accessibility. So, although I can't add anything about specific wins because we're not launched yet, but I just wanted to sort of re-emphasize the cost.
Great, thank you, David. And for you, Kate, have you got any initiatives or projects that you've been involved with that you think are very powerful and that have had great success in your area?
I think for me personally, coming back to what Simon was saying about the cybersecurity, I think inaccessible content can be really, really dangerous. If your cyber technology software isn't accessible, you're automatically opening 20% of people up to a vulnerability. And I think the same applies to other industries. And I think where we've done kind of workshops or given advice or provided toolkits to people that, to me, really need to make a change, like domestic abuse charities, suicide prevention companies, like even down to kind of food packaging and allergy awareness. I just think for me, my passion and where I'm really proud is that we've been able to not just go with the big brands. We've also managed to make changes in what companies that are so important to not alienate the disabled community. Plus, we also opened up a new user testing group alongside our disabled community for 60 plus users, because people are in work much longer nowadays. People don't retire till too late, in my opinion. But we're in the digital age, and give it 30 years, we're going to be in that group. And I think, coming back, I think it was Simon mentioned about how everything is all like animated and beautiful, but it's not functional. And basically, we've kind of said to the older generation, let's stop sites being designed by 25-year-olds who think it looks cool, and actually let's make it work. And I'm sure the same for David. The over 65 plus is also another group that really need to make sure that they've got accessible banking.
Thank you.
And the older generation, I mean, we're getting to the point. The original game Pong came out in 1972. I know I start sounding a bit like a stuck record because I always mention that game. But we've got a generation of people that are coming to retirement that are going to be working later in life. They're going to want to access IT right up until the end, and with people living into their late 80s, early 90s, and even beyond now. Unfortunately, as you get older, things break, things don't work so well. And that assistive and accessibility is going to be essential for a large population as we move forward, or a larger population, sorry. So we need to get our acts together now to make sure that we can deal with that.
Just as I'm aware that we've got 10 minutes left of the session, I'm going to kind of combine the last couple of questions. So this first one, coming to UK, are there any specific best practices or design principles that companies could use? And equally, what can individuals do to help advocate and contribute to improve digital technology and accessibility?
Okay, so the specific best practices, I mean, there needs to be a consistent framework. Ultimately, we need consistent, clear UX. We need to tone down on the sensory elements and make everything sensory friendly. And when it comes to colours, make them clear, make them high contrast, but not kind of neon. But to be honest, I don't think that's necessarily a best practice, but I always think just make it super, super, super clear and super simple, and don't over animate for the sake of it, really. And I'm really sorry, I forgot your second question.
And what can individuals do to help champion change and advocate for the lack of digital accessibility that needs to change?
I think when people see problems, they need to speak up, and then those people need to listen, and kind of co-create. I think unlearning bad habits is hard, but it totally can be done. So I think listen is really the key. Be empathic, care, and make a small change. Lots of small changes add up to one big thing, but just take everything on board. Be humble. Don't take ego out of it. If someone says they've got a problem with it, that's not you having a go at a brand or slating anything. You just need to take a step back, listen to that advice, and action it.
Thank you. Simon, is there anything that you want to add to that in terms of what can companies do to be more accessible digitally, and what can individuals do to champion that advocate and an advocate for change?
I'm going to mirror pretty much what was just said. Social media can be a really bad thing. And, if somebody doesn't understand accessibility or things like that, we have to give them the benefit of the doubt and educate them on how they can make things more accessible. There's a very much an aggressive, vicious cycle of, oh, you don't understand this, therefore you are X, Y, and Z, insert ist statement here. And I think give people the benefit of the doubt, sit them down and go, look, I can't access this because of this, and this. and it would be really good if you could do this. And I think if we can get a better conversation going that's not condescending on any side, and is treating people on a level peg, things will progress a lot better.
Thank you. If anyone that's watching has any comments on anything that's been discussed, please put them in the chat. We'll try and get around to them in the next 10 minutes. David, for you, what can companies do to be more digitally accessible for those who want to access banking apps? Obviously, there's a number of banks who are all online now, as you said earlier, like they're moving away from having branches into the digital space. And what can individuals do to kind of champion change and ask for the banks to do more?
I think communicating, being proactive in communicating with customers would be a big step forward. The whole branch closure programs they do not involve communicating with customers. So they are driven by for monetary reasons, and I think on the customer side of things, for accessibility, for those who are capable and comfortable about providing feedback or even complaining, then I think that they should be encouraged to do that as much as possible. But with vulnerable customers, a proportion of those customers are not going to feel comfortable in digital channels, and that's another barrier that is preventing this feedback to get to banks. But I would say that going forward, banks need to be doing more of involving people with disabilities at the very outset of any development. As Simon, I think, said, it's a lot more difficult to bolt accessibility on than to include it from the inception. So the more that can happen, the better.
And coming to you, David, for the last question, what would be your one wish or one hope for digital accessibility and how we can improve it? If you had one wish overnight to change something, what would it be?
Is this a question for me? Sorry, Charlie.
Yes, yeah, David, sorry.
Sorry, are you asking?
Yeah, sorry, David. I think the internet's cut out a little bit there. But yeah, could you tell me what's your one wish or hope for digital accessibility?
Okay. Inclusion, and by that I mean involved touch point of development, because by doing so, you are going to end up designing a product or service that has been road tested effectively by the people who will ultimately be using it, and so they're the ones who know best as to whether it's going to work for them, where improvements are needed, whatever. Just involve people with disabilities in the design process.
Thank you. And for you, Kay, what would be your one wish if you could change everything overnight?
That's so hard, isn't it? That question. But I think for me, it's about that companies prioritize accessibility, and like we said, they didn't bolt on, they didn't use kind of overlays, they didn't see it as a kind of extra. I think it needs to be prioritized as much as bugs are on a website. You know, that all our brands, if there's an issue or a bug on a site or a new browser version, and there's an issue, it's immediately escalated to the top of the pile. And I suppose that would be my wish, is that companies did the opposite and kind of prioritized accessibility by having, I think, diversity in leadership, and DE&I actually including accessibility. It mirrors everything that's said before. Don't leave it till the last. Don't do it as an add-on.
Don't treat it as a tick box approach.
Exactly.
And for you, Simon, what would be your one wish?
I just get to talk about technology and how people access it, and not have to go through, you are going to make this accessible, aren't you? That it just becomes, you know, part of the business, that you don't ask about whether accessibility can be included. You just talk about innovation, how you make it happen. And that would be ideal for me, because then I get to geek out even more.
I can tell that for all of you, this is it's more than a passion project. It's your life, and it's something that you're all working towards day in, day out. And so thank you for taking the time to chat with me today and be on the live, because I think it's really helpful. And please continue the conversation in the chat post today's live, because I think for us, we are not just a 2-day event, we're a year-round campaign that we want to help encourage conversations around disability and how we can make it more accessible. And please follow our website at www.thedisabilityexpo.com to sign up to our newsletter, where you'll get regular updates about the event, what's going on. You can hear more about the gaming zone, which Simon is involved in, and also network with these guys online on LinkedIn, because they're all very prominent in their areas and helping challenge and change the stigma around disability and digital inaccessibility. So yeah, please go and engage with these people these guys on social media. And we look forward to joining everyone on the next live. So thank you very much.
Have a great Christmas, everybody.